You are listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, happy Friday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my program, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And you can come on over to the simulcast in video over on my YouTube channel. The best feature of that is that you can join the live chat room as you listen to the show. And that's right now it's going on. Go over there, join the other Intrepheads at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. All right, I want to thank you for being here. It's Friday. It's the end of the week. Are you under self-sequestration? Are you being socially, what's the term they're using for it? Social invalid? No, socially cut off? Yeah, something like that. Are you socially distancing yourself from everybody because of this whole coronavirus scare? Now, that's something, if you're stuck at home, then you're like me. You're an awful lot like me. And you've also got kids that are home, which can be thoroughly exhausting. I have a child here right now who knows I'm on radio that is wanting to get my attention. And and I can't help her right now because I'm on radio. But does the closed studio door mean anything? No, it doesn't, because they still just walk right in. And so this is what happens when you've got kids around all the time. And maybe that's just part of parenting, is that you've got kids at home, and the kids can be exhausting because they're here all the time. And she didn't close the studio door on her way out. So these are the things that are the little things of parenting, but when you're home alone, not alone, when you're home and your kids are home with you because they've canceled school for several weeks and you're all sequestered together, what do you do with that time? So how is your time going? All right, I will let my daughter come in here while I'm doing live radio and tell me what's the problem. Okay, you can go put a little Band-Aid on that. That's not going to...
a pencil.
Okay, well, wash it off and put a little Band-Aid on it. It doesn't look too bad. I don't think you'll lose a lot of blood. And you're okay. Close that door, baby. Thank you. There you go. Scintillating live radio on top of it. That was drama, probably like you've never heard it before. So she apparently stuck her toe on a pencil. And so wash it out. Put a Band-Aid on it. Thank you. I'm going to go on with my radio show. So there you go, folks. And those of you on the radio, you didn't get a chance to see any of that. I don't even know if those of you on video actually saw her. I think she was out of the frame. But there you go. So are you home? How's life treating you? Are things going okay for you? Is it difficult being at home? Are you out of work right now? Is it affecting the bottom line for you right now? What's it doing to your relationship with your spouse? If your spouse is also home with you, how is that going? So these are things. My wife happens to be at high-level anxiety right now because the kids are at home. And so that puts a little pressure on everybody around the house. So what do you do if you've got somebody at home and you're all together all of a sudden? And frankly, we're together all the time anyway. I work at home, my wife works at home. And we've got the little 5-year-old who's here half days because she's got half day pre-kindergarten. And so, but the other 2 kids are gone most of the days until the weekends. So there you go. If your home is anything like mine, I hope that you're having a decent figuring out of jumping over the initial hurdles of being self-sequestered. Now, as we know, this is not a mandate. There's not a mandate from the government that says you can't go outside. There's no military trucks roving or police walking around making sure you stay inside your home. These are suggestions, and everybody's pretty much taking it up. And I think the general public will let you know if they think, hey, you're probably not supposed to be out here. Now, here in the state of Wisconsin, we've had one death from coronavirus. And I think over in Minnesota, they've had 87 people affected, I think. And we've had 3 or 4 affected here over the river in Wisconsin. And, of course, in Minnesota, you're probably talking about your condensed metro areas, like the Twin Cities, where you've got Minneapolis and St. Paul together, crushed together. And now, while you are at home, I haven't really said much about being at home, but while you're at home, how tired are you of getting messages, social media, and everything you look at, everything in the in the news is absolutely inundating us with coronavirus and the 24/7 news cycle. And it gets tiring, it gets overwhelming. I think we all know there's a pandemic going on. It's not a pandemic like the movies like to show you a pandemic. This is a pandemic that just means every nation has been affected by it. And I think it's well under control. The head of the snake is starting to move beyond us. And we'll soon see the tail of the snake. This thing will be under control, I believe, shortly. That's my personal belief. I believe that what worries most people and builds up anxiety is the fact that it's talked about incessantly. Everywhere you look, every time I turn on the news, doesn't matter what point in the news I am, I'm hearing something about coronavirus. No matter what station I'm on or what network I'm on. Every time I open up my social media, it is flooded with stories about coronavirus. Yeah, there's some great comic relief in there as well about coronavirus, so that's there too. Then all of my private messaging from my social media, my phone messenger, as well as my text messages, are full of articles and things that people want to send me about coronavirus. And it seems like, what are UFOs not important anymore? Because you know what? I think we all know what's going on, and we all know what we have to do to prevent the spread and to try to protect ourselves as best we can. And once we know those things, we just kind of wait it out. I suppose it's like being in a medieval village and knowing that the next village over had Black Death. You know, the bubonic plague. I don't think they called it bubonic back then, but the plague. And so it's knowing that you got to kind of sequester yourself. And I don't think this coronavirus is something that's like the Black Plague. Boy, if you got that, you rarely survived that. But this is something that affects people who have down immunity systems and that they're or lowered immunity systems, and people that are at high risk. I myself am a person who is at high risk, but I'm not worrying about things. I'm taking the precautions necessary. It's affected normal life because everything around us is affected. I'm at high risk because I have heart disease. I had a heart attack and I had heart surgery 3 years ago, open heart surgery, so blah, blah, blah. I've got heart disease. I'm automatically in that category. I've also got diabetes. And so I've got those two things going against me. I'm still in my late 50s. For all practical purposes, I'm 60, because I will be later this year. But so I've got, they're saying 65 and up. So I'm not so much counting the elderly thing yet. But I've got a couple of strikes against me for being somebody who is susceptible to coronavirus. Now, if I end up with it, I'm not going to eat any words. I'm just going to say, oh, I got it. But I don't have it right now. You know, knock on wood. I got wood here. And so, but we're taking all the precautions. We've got 3 little kids at home. My wife has not so much autoimmunity things going on. She's got a couple of health issues. My kids are pretty healthy, so I'm not worried. So how is it in your home? How are you coping with this stuff? It's like today, I have to go out today and go do stuff. And everybody's like, you're going to go outside? Yeah, you can go outside. just be careful who you come in contact with and how you come in contact with people. And it was funny, I just took my little 5-year-old to the doctor the other day to get a shot. And the shot was an antibiotic because she jammed her front tooth up into her gum. And she had a little infection in there before they could remove it. And so they gave her a shot of antibiotics last Saturday. And I was in the hospital, and the doctor walked in the room, and the doctor immediately shook my hand. So those are things we do. I don't know if he felt, he's clean enough and everything's clean enough, or he's got inside information that says, there's not much to worry about shaking somebody's hand. I think what you got to watch out for is when you shake hands or touch people and things like that you don't know. You know what? Use common sense. When you're out and about, you don't have to touch anybody. Use the kind of 6-foot rule. Just that kind of, let's keep distance. Let's do our thing. Rainey and I went shopping a couple of days ago just to get some essentials around the house and stuff. And you know what? We were safe. So you wipe things down. I know Walmart, the big shopping place here in our little town of New Richmond, Wisconsin, has wipes that are on. They've always had them there for years. But sanitary wipes that you wipe down the handles of the carts when you grab the cart. And you can wipe down your hands, too. They got a hand sanitizer there. They've always had that there. And so now, we always used it. I don't like touching that. I don't know about you, but I don't like putting my hands on a cart handle that some guy who went and pooped in the stall at Walmart, walked out and didn't wash his hands, grabbed that cart. That's happened. So, you know what? Travel with some sanitary wipes in your back pocket. I used to do that all the time anyway. And I'm not a clean freak or a germ freak. So anyway, all of that to say is introduction to my show. Happy introduction. I've brought back the coronavirus to the fore here and got it in front of your face again. We're 12 minutes into this show just about, and we haven't talked about anything else yet, so let's move on. Yesterday, we were talking about toxic relationships. Now, somebody had questioned me because I had put up the graphic said, toxic, are you the only person you know of who's toxic? While the title of the show was, are you the only person you know who is non-toxic? That's because it can go both ways. It swings both ways. Are you the person who is affected by the toxic people in your life, or are you perhaps the toxic person in your life? When we talked about some of those things yesterday that you can look at to self, just like this whole thing with self-sequestering. Are you self-examining the way you act around your partner, around people you know, around your family and children? Are you the one who is perhaps bringing toxicity to your family? Do you, I don't know, what are things? You can think of things that are defined as toxicity. Do you call names of your children? Do you belittle your children and your partner? Do you express your anger all the time through the various ways we can do that? Passive-aggressive toward our partners, screaming at everybody. If that is, and I'm not talking about moments of these, because everybody's got them. Everybody yells. Everybody does stuff. But you examine your own self and find out, am I the one that's introducing toxic behavior into my family? And is it affecting the way my family functions? Is it affecting the way my children function? Is it affecting my relationship? And then, of course, it's easy to observe when somebody else does these things. But what happens when it's you doing these things? We don't always see it unless the other person points out, hey, yo, bitch, you are being, and bitch, I'm using you, not ubiquitous, maybe ubiquitously, ambidextrously, for both sexes. I'm not saying you call your wife a bitch or, you get me, don't you? You hear what I'm saying? It's like, yo, bitches, Not talking to any one gender there or sex. So, if your partner looks at you and says, yo, bitch, be you male or female, maybe you need to look inward. And if you don't have somebody that's doing that in your life and you're blind to your own anxieties or blind to your own toxicity, sometimes you need somebody to point that out. But maybe a show like this will maybe let you think a little bit. There are times when I've yelled at my kids and I'm really pissed off at them. Like last night, let's give you a for instance. It was about 10 o'clock last night. Kids were already supposed to be in bed. And it was right after the end of the show last night. And my kids were running around, pounding up and down the stairs. And we live in a townhome that's side by side. So we got neighbors right on the other side of this wall of our house. And the rest of the house goes this way and up. And if I can hear it in this office, the studio space, if they were to do it right now, you'd pick it up on the microphone. I wonder what they hear next door. Now, there's only a young woman and her older brother that live next door. No kids, no married couples or anything like that. But still, at 10 o'clock at night, kids ought not be running around and pounding up and down the stairs. And so I went out and I said, hey, guys. I said, that's it. I said, this has been going on now since 7 o'clock this morning. 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock. What do you got? 15 hours. And it was literally, folks, all day yesterday. I don't know how many times I had to stop what I was working on, or that Rainey, whose desk is way over on that end of the office, when she's working or she's doing something or I hear her out there, those kids are relentless. So, and now that they're home right now, everybody's goofy because you can't just push them outside. It's not quite warm enough to be playing out there for lengthy periods of time. Thank goodness the temps are going up this next week. So, what do you do and how toxic do you respond to them? I started by saying I had an example of that last night. That's why I was talking about that. I'm yelling, and the kid has some little a toy police baton. It's plastic and hollow. And the little one, and she's smacking everybody with it out there. After 10 o'clock at night, and they're all running around, and everybody else is complaining and screaming to me and Mom and being hit. So what do? I went out there and I raised, I'm coming out and hell's coming with me, because I'd heard enough of it all day long. And I said, all right, you guys, this has been 15 hours of this nonsense. I said, if you're going to play rough, expect to be treated roughly. I said, if you're all going to be doing that, then get it together and figure it out. I said, but now you've got it, Mom and Dad, to the point where we're losing it. And you're going to bear the brunt of that right now. And I said, number one, it's 10:20 last night. You were supposed to be in bed 2 hours ago. Up, let's go. And so rounded everybody up. But, afterwards, I look at myself and I look at the way I yell. And I say, am I toxic to my kids? Do I shut my kids down? There is a thing, I know when I was in ministry and working with youth for a long time, and then worked with guys in troubled relationships, there was that whole fist, we called it. That fist is when you're talking to somebody and you're closing them down, you're getting the fist. You're getting that resistance. And sometimes it's the way you treat that person that makes them resist you. And so what you want to do is open that up. You want to open up. It's like closing a spirit. Can you have another person, be it a child, be it a spouse, where you can close down their spirit and they become a fist to you? And this is kind of what we see with even our little children sometimes. When they're like this, they got something going on. And sometimes it's all it takes is you being the one who shuts that off. You open that fist back up. You open their spirit. And so I sometimes have to look at myself and I go, I don't care what my anxieties might be. I don't care how upset I might be with my spouse or my children or whatever it might be, it is my responsibility to take care of the way I act. So if you even catch yourself thinking, am I spreading any kind of toxicity amongst my loved ones? Maybe you are, and maybe it's time to self-examine and to look at the things that you need to do. Sometimes it's all in that area of anger. What pisses you off the most? Now, I get angry, but I don't think I have an anger problem because I try to catch it pretty quickly. But there are things that you can do, and how do you handle toxicity amongst yesterday we kind of left off talking about how do you handle toxicity with parents, with perhaps in-laws, these situations that we all have. How do you handle that toxicity? And we were talking about some of the common signs of having a toxic person in your life, be it a parent or a spouse or a partner. They have that highly negatively reactive attitude about them. They're emotionally out of control. They tend to dramatize everything. Look at yourself, too. Are you that kind of person? Do you lack empathy? The toxic person or parent isn't able to empathize with anybody. Instead, everything's about them and their needs and how they see things and what their relationship is supposed to be like with you. They're extremely controlling, usually. Are you controlling? Do you try to control the way the people around you act? Most toxic individuals, the more they want to control everything and everyone in their vicinity, the more you can tell how toxic they are, how controlling they are. And this means over-parenting, making unreasonable demands, even on adult children. This is the way toxic people work. They're controlling. And then there's the highly critical people. They're critical of everything you do, everything your spouse does, if it's an in-law, things like that. And they blame everyone else. It's the disharmony, the disagreements, the hostility, the family breakdown that are caused by toxic parents. And this is always the fault of someone else. So these are the signs. I just had two little girls. My two little girls sneak in here, trying to get my attention. And so what am I doing? I already told them what the rules were. They knew the rules a year ago. So I just ignored them right now. They're trying to get something. They're crawling around on the floor, tapping on my leg, trying to get my attention. And I know there's not an emergency going on. So what do I have to do? When I'm on radio, I got to ignore them. They eventually looked at me, waving their arms at me, trying to get my attention right here. And I just put my hand up, maybe off camera. I don't think you could see it. I put my arm out and I said, "Nuh-uh, go." So kids at home, by the way, that's what that one's about. That's not about toxicity. And so how do you handle toxic parents? You set up boundaries. You set boundaries. You set limits. You clearly define what you're going to accept and what you're not going to accept. And that's very crucial. You have to be clear in defining these boundaries. Now, sad to say, I saw some people here yesterday talking in the chat room that were all about the problems that go on in their relationship, and they have a toxic problem. Are you setting up boundaries? And folks, I hate to say this, we're at the end of the first segment. I got to go out to break. We're going to pick this up right when we get back. So sit tight, have your thinking caps on, look in the mirror a little bit, see where you're at. Let's talk about this. Stay tuned. All right, folks, we're back from that break. Thanks for sitting tight. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And go on over, see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio and how you can fill your schedule on whatever you're doing. You can, if you're sequestered at home, you need some good listening, go over to Odyssey Radio, turn them on, check their schedule. Just have the stream going all day and see what all they've got going on. Also, you can join this broadcast and the live chat room with the other Intrepheads over on my YouTube channel. Simulcast video to this audio show. And you can see it at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now I want to jump right back into this toxic thing, this looking at yourself, this trying to figure out what do you do with toxic parents, toxic in-laws, toxic partners, toxic people in your life. What if you are the toxic person in your sphere of influence? So the first thing you've got to do when you've identified these people by the 4 things that we talked about in the first segment, number 1, you got to set boundaries. This is where we left off. Setting boundaries or limits. You've got to clearly define what you're going to accept and what you're not going to accept. And that's crucial. And we mentioned that there are people here listening to this show that I know of that are trapped in toxic relationships. And they're still in their toxic relationship. They're hoping to make it work, or they're ambivalent to it working anymore. There's just nowhere else to go. Or they haven't taken the steps necessary. I got to tell you what, you've got to make your boundaries clear. And if somebody is toxic or abusive to you, number 1, abuse is the first reason to get your butt out of that relationship. You find someplace to go. You set that boundary really quick. I'm distancing myself from you, and that is my boundary, and you will not cross over into my territory. So set those boundaries. This is crucial when you're dealing with somebody who's toxic. If it's a parent, if it's an in-law, you set those boundaries. There are certain things that I can tell you what, if my mother did certain things toward Rainey as her mother-in-law, my mom, my wife's mother-in-law, there are certain things on a list that if my mom did those things, I'd be telling my mom, you're done. You make that stuff right, but until you do, you're not welcome here. There is a boundary. And it's going to take time to heal that. So there are boundaries. And you know what, folks? It sounds hard. It's not all that hard. If somebody is abusing you and breaking the boundaries and being toxic to you, you create the boundary. It's as easy as this. Watch this. You could be sitting by yourself and say, I'm scared of my spouse. I'm scared of what they're going to react. But you know what? I got to set a boundary. So you look up and you say, you know what? That's not acceptable. I'm not doing that anymore, and neither are you. There's the boundary. And then from there you can talk about consequences. But you have to be strong about it. You have to be very clear in defining those boundaries. You have to limit your contact, perhaps with your parents or the in-laws, and to keep your time together positive and healthy. So there are things to do. Boundaries is the first one. Second one, control the location. Setting the location for your interactions with the toxic parent is also a way to limit problem behaviors. Meeting in public space allows you to leave if they don't respect your boundaries. And it also creates a neutral place where you're less likely to fall into the old patterns of behavior, and a common issue if you meet in the family home. But you know what? There's a thing about this. As a couple, if you're dealing with a toxic parent or a toxic in-law, you've got to be together on that. When you're not, it all kind of falls apart at the seams. But if you're one partner in a relationship, sometimes you got to set your own boundaries. But make sure you're not stomping on your partner, who may have boundaries that they need to set or aren't quite in the place that you are. Now, self-care is the third one. Be kind to yourself. You don't need to spend every holiday or special event with your parents. Instead, spend time with the people that are positive, make you feel great about yourself, and that encourage you to continue to be the wonderful person you are. So, you know what? Break the chain sometimes. If you've got parents that are toxic, if you've got abusive situations, break the chain. So you can talk to people. There are good people out there to talk to. There's therapists, there's counselors, there's people in the know who could be instrumental in helping you understand the impact that toxic parents and toxic people have had on your life. And developing effective managing strategies for the relationship going forward is what you need to do. You need to set, remember the first thing we said was boundaries. There needs to be boundaries. So let's look at boundaries a little bit. What does that look like? If you have to set a boundary up, you're already in a position where a boundary is necessary. There's boundaries, and then there's what's been called codependency for many years that can thwart those boundaries. So this is kind of how to love and value yourself in your relationship with other people, be it your own spouse, be it other people that you know that you have to be around, be it a parent or an in-law. So let's move a bit from the toxic in-laws and toxic parent things and just looking to codependency and boundaries. It's a very popular topic. Codependency literature. Go look it up at Barnes & Noble at the store or look online. It's the challenge that a codependent has in setting healthy boundaries. That's what codependency is. So let's take a closer look at it. And this is from an overview of the typical behaviors and the causes of those behaviors. Codependency isn't a mental health diagnosis. Rather, it's a learned behavior. And it often develops very, very early in childhood. And most, but not all, codependents come from dysfunctional families, which most of us come from to one degree or another. Often with a history of codependency, addiction, narcissism, emotionally unavailable parents, abuse. Those are the things that can kind of set codependency into motion. And they usually start when we're younger. So if you've got those issues now, sometimes it's worth digging into the past to see where they came from. Not so that you can rest your case there and go, oh, boo-hoo, look at my past. No, it's a thing where you say, I recognize what caused this. Now I can root it out and I can deal with it. So the codependent parent and the addict or the narcissist sets the pattern for how children see a relationship. Children learn from the codependent parent to try harder in the relationship. Do you try hard? Do you have to work really hard in your relationship? Did you learn from the codependent parent when you were small that they were the one working the hardest to try to keep that relationship together? They give all to satisfy the needs of the narcissist or the abuser or the toxic person, the addicted, or even the abusive parent, that somehow they can make changes needed to correct or fix the relationship. There was something very early on that was said to me, and I've talked about stuff I went through in my past enough that you know some of the things I went through as a child. And I had a counselor, a therapist once tell me, you are the classic case of setting yourself up in relationships. This is what codependent people do. People who've grown up with abuse. People who have had those toxic things. Who have had that modeled to them at very young ages. People who have had to thwart abuse of their own. They tend to be the people that will later in life get themselves linked up with the same kind of person. And this is all on a subconscious level. They find somebody that will treat them badly, that will, and maybe that isn't the way it looks on the surface or the way it starts, but they allow that to go on because subconsciously they are looking for ways to bring that back into their life so they can figure out how to heal it. And so it's a subconscious thing that goes on. It sounds a little gobbledygooky psychologically, but it's the truth, folks. And you know what? I've been there, so I understand it. And so it's not uncommon for these types of dysfunctional families or for children to actually take on a parent role as the parents are too caught up in the dynamics of their own destructive relationships. Have you been there? Children learn how to walk on eggshells, how to keep their needs hidden, and to put the needs of the others before everything else, and how the outward appearance of the relationship is of utmost importance, and how it looks to the world, to everybody else out there, not how it's actually functioning on the inside. And so it's not uncommon in these types of dysfunctional families for children to actually take on a parental role as the parents are too caught up in the dynamics of their own destructive relationship. I got to tell you, my own wife had a mother who went to prison when she was in her teens and was gone from their family for 6+ years. And my wife had 2 younger siblings that were 10 and 11 years younger than her. And so when she was a teenager, her grandparents had a little cottage next to their cottage out on the lake in Minnesota that they owned, and they put Rainey and her siblings up in that little cottage 2 doors down. And so they were always there helping and trying to mentor and trying to take care of their needs. But Rainey became the mother to the 10 and the 11-year-old. And do you think that this did not create problems for her later in life? Here she was as a teenager needing to play the role of parent. And you know that those things can come out in the way you deal with other people. And so that's the kind of thing I'm talking about when a child needs to take on the role of being a parent. And that was to the extreme case there because the parent was actually gone, just not emotionally unavailable. So now children learn how to walk on eggshells. They take on the roles. They have the outward appearance of trying to keep things intact. And children who learn these lessons don't learn to foster their own self-worth and their own value. And they start to see themselves as an important and autonomous individual struggling with future relationships. They're always looking for someone to fix, to repair, to look after, rather than finding a partner who's secure, independent, and loving. And when they get into those relationships where there's somebody secure and independent and loving, they can create problems out of nothing. And so this is how it affects the codependent person, the codependent child who's grown up. Do you know people like that? Are you in a situation like that? If this sounds familiar, and caring for the needs of your partner is more important than being happy yourself, you might be a codependent. You may have a great deal of difficulty in setting boundaries in the relationship. And you might find that even the thought of saying no to the other partner may cause anxiety. If they're there to become angry, displeased, upset, you want to avoid that. And so you've set yourself up to being unhappy because you're there to solve the problems. Now, at the same time, you feel unhappy in the relationship yourself, but you keep it to yourself. Most codependents feel trapped in the relationships that they're in because of the scenario they've subconsciously helped set up. But the need to be with somebody rather than on their own is a more frightening thought altogether. At the same time, it's very common for a person who's a codependent to feel frustrated and even angry at the amount of energy and time they spend in a relationship without any reciprocation. Over time, this person, their anger, their frustration builds, but it's usually turned inwards, as expressing anger and resentment to the partner only increase the risk of conflict and hostility. And the very things the codependent wants to avoid in the struggle to create the perfect relationship. So they want things to be perfect, but they find they're trapped in a situation where it is not. And they keep bringing and giving and giving and giving, but nothing's changing because they're not creating the relationship that they think they want to have. They're creating unhappiness for themselves. Does this describe you? Does this describe the type of relationship you're in? Have you come from situations in your distant past where you've had to be the protector, you've watched the codependent parent, and then you've gained that modeling, that relationship that was modeled to you is what you have? Is your anger and your frustration built up over this? Because you're angry and resentful to the partner for putting you in that position, and when actually it's you keeping yourself in that position. So the other side of the coin can also occur with a codependent. Over time, the frustration with the constant demands and the drains on time and energy builds up and results in lashing out against the partner. It may also result in the codependent choosing a partner that needs a caregiver, allowing the codependent to have some level of control at all times. At the same time, the dysfunctional partner is resistant to this control and is also lashing out. And this creates that conflict that's going back and forth and a lack of control throughout the relationship. So sometimes a codependent person may be in a relationship with a perfectly decent person, but they try to impose the control, and the other decent person doesn't want that, and it starts to create conflict. And so they build up their own walls of conflict. So the unhealthy person is the dysfunctional, codependent person. Now, like I said, that's the flip side of the coin, because the other side is that you've gotten yourself into an abusive relationship. So the root of all this conflict and all this strife, both internally and within the relationship, is often caused by a lack of boundaries. The codependent is willing to compromise their own personal happiness and their needs to attempt to create a positive relationship with a person who will never be satisfied. Are you in that type of situation? Do you know people who are in that situation? At some level, the codependent recognizes this inequity, but is also very fearful of being rejected and has a fear of confrontation. They don't want to get into the fight. Fear of being rejected. Why should you fear being rejected by somebody who's an asshole? There's that fear of rejection. There's also the codependent who gets in with a healthy-minded person and who is not creating the conflict. And they create the conflict, and they're still afraid of the rejection. So remember, the goal of the codependent is to make everything fit their idea of the perfect couple and how that should look around them. The perfect family, the perfect structure. It's their idea in their head. The codependent brings this to the table. And if it doesn't fit that, their life becomes chaos. And it creates problems. They want the idea of what it looks to be a perfect family and situation to those that look at them around them, to the world around them, or to meet the goal of what is in their head. So saying no, or choosing to do something of importance to them rather than to the partner, is the antithesis to achieving the goal. So this is what the codependent person is trapped in. Perhaps you recognize this. Perhaps you are the one who is the codependent. Excuse me. It's not coronavirus. It's not anthrax. So maybe you're the person who does this in your relationships or in the relationship you're currently in. So what are boundaries? Let's look at that for a second. I keep saying you got to set boundaries. What are these boundaries? What's it look like? Boundaries are the rules or the invisible walls or fences that divide people and keep the physical, emotional, and mental elements of life separate from those of the others around you. Boundaries are the rules by which we let other people know what we will accept and what we do not accept. And when we fail to set boundaries for ourselves, we automatically and by default allow others to set those boundaries. We also open ourselves to having to deal continually with irrational, unreasonable expectations by those willing to take more than their fair share in the relationship. And I've got to say that sometimes it's that other way around. It's the codependent who is taking more than their fair share, who is being the controlling one, and the other person might be the person who has to set up a boundary with the codependent person. Now you say, what's the point of even being together if you've got all these walls up in between each other? Well, the problem is there are different kinds of walls. Sometimes we methodically build these invisible walls. We keep putting on another brick. And then we put on another brick and another brick and another brick. We build walls between ourselves. That's not boundaries. That's building walls through negative behaviors and negative things. Sometimes, if we want to keep that relationship and we want to find ways for it to heal and act the way we wanted it to act and the way it's supposed to act, we have to set up boundaries and say, there are certain lines you won't cross. And this is what we have to deal with now. So how do you set these boundaries? And how do other people know that those boundaries are even there? So the key to setting boundaries is to let other people know that those boundaries exist. As a quick example, imagine you had a child and allowed her to access anything she wanted to eat in the kitchen. And you didn't provide any dietary boundaries. Kids naturally choose foods that they like, and they'd indulge in ice cream, cookies, chips, and other types of foods, typically avoiding healthy foods and like vegetables and fruit. And so parents naturally set boundaries with kids about food, and they let them know the rules and the expectations. Now, this might include having a small serving of ice cream after finishing your meal or having cookies occasionally in limited numbers. So kids learn that these boundaries exist when the rule is explained. Now, that doesn't mean they won't test those boundaries. That the parent has to be firm and consistent. And through articulating the boundary and then being consistent, a rule is created that allows for the positive aspects of the behavior, but also provides care and protection. The same types of boundaries are needed in a relationship, folks. However, as we have just looked at codependent behaviors, it's easy to see why setting those relationship rules or fences and holding to them is going to be a challenge. It's like, let's take a simple one with a couple. Let's say you're having trouble communicating. And you say, you know what, my boundary is this. We're going to have no interrupting when we argue. And we're going to listen to the other person. Now, can you make the other person do that? No. But you can say, these are my expectations, and the consequences of interrupting, not letting me speak my piece, not giving me the opportunity to air my grievances when I have them, whatever that form that may take for you, is the thing that's going to cause a consequence. The consequence might be, not going to have this conversation with you now, until you can abide by the boundaries. So codependents may understand that the boundaries they need, or they may understand the boundaries they need, but enforcing them becomes the problem. To make matters even more difficult, the narcissist or the addicted partner is all too aware of the dynamic and takes great pleasure in pushing and manipulating these boundaries, or plowing right through them, or just pushing the buttons to irritate the shit out of you. So the common reasons that boundaries are a challenge for codependents include, now we're almost out of time, folks, so we'll hit these things and then we'll move on. Fear of confrontation. Simply, the act of standing up to the partner may be overwhelming for the codependent, particularly if these types of issues have resulted in the partner leaving, or threatening, or to leave, or to become emotionally or physically abusive in the past. And lack of understanding of needs. If you never know boundaries in relationships, including your relationships with parents, it's difficult to know what you need. And so the belief that others are more important, the deeply ingrained belief that the other person is more important and needs to come first, is an overwhelming factor in the challenge of building boundaries and maintaining them. Then there's the fear of loss of approval, taking the blame route, lack of support, low self-esteem and self-worth. The good news is that all of these types of beliefs and fears and issues can be changed. And you know what we're going to have to do? We're going to have to talk about that next time, because we're out of time. Thanks for being here, folks. Have a great weekend. Be here Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Left Coast Time for It's Sunday. And we'll see you then. Have a good weekend.